Hello and welcome to Race to Your Career. In this episode, I'll be joined by an equine vet and a racing groom. We'll be discussing caring for horses, rules and regulations, and careers within horse care and training. So Ben and Sally, thank you for joining me today on this episode. If we can begin by hearing about your roles and what they include. Sally.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I am an equine veterinary surgeon and I work for the British Horseracing Authority in the capacity as veterinary officer. So my role is to attend race days and make sure that the rules of racing are upheld in terms of welfare, safety and integrity of the racehorses.
Ooh, so you're quite a powerful woman then, in what you do.
No, I don't think that's how we view it, but we feel it's a really important role to make sure that the racehorses are as well looked after as they should be.
And Ben, what about you?
So my role is initially I'm a racing groom and I'm employed by a racehorse trainer here in Newmarket, who's James Ferguson Racing, and my role is to take care of the horses on a day-to-day basis, take them out to exercise, attend to all their daily needs, which would include sort of mucking out a stable and sort of general stable duties within the yard.
And what is that role known as?
It would be known as a racing groom or a work rider type of role, and we're there to sort of see to the horse every day. We will be allocated horses that we take care of, that we ride in the morning, and then we'll come back in the evening times to take care of the horses again. That'll be between grooming horses and cleaning out their stables and maybe taking them out for a lighter exercise in the afternoon. So.
And what made you choose that particular role, Ben?
I'm from a horse racing background myself, and my dad was a jockey, and I grew up having sort of horses and ponies throughout my whole childhood, and despite their best efforts to really kind of help me like pursue a career sort of in a different role in racing, I was really sort of passionate about the day-to-day care of horses, just because I've been doing it from such an early age. I was then able to sort of integrate myself quite quickly. From school weekends and school holidays, I was, picking up and learning about the racing industry from trainers that I worked for.
I'm interested to know then, seeing as your family were trying to encourage, not push, encourage you to do one thing and you chose a different avenue, were they supportive?
Yeah, absolutely. No, they were, and I think they understand. I mean, there's a great variation in racing, and despite the dedication you have to show in being a racing groom, it's one of them, I feel, in most rewarding roles, because you always have that connection with the horse, as well as the trainer and the owner, obviously. But when you feel like the horse is a part of you because you're up there every day from early starts. And you're able to have like the most affinity with the horse because you're there all the time with them, and it's great satisfaction.
So it sounds as though you really kind of, like you said, connection with the horse. You build a connection with the horses. You have a bond with the horses. Is that something that you can do too, Sally, in your role?
Yes, absolutely. We don't get to build such a one-on-one connection because the horses are not under our care, not the way that Ben looks after them. But we often see the same horses coming racing, and we form quite a connection and a working relationship with all of those horses and with the racing grooms like Ben and the trainers as well.
When we spoke about your role when we first started the episode, you spoke about how you go to the races and you make sure that everything is within the guidelines that it should be. Tell us more about those guidelines.
The rules of racing are quite clear with the expectations of how horses should be looked after and how we should treat them properly. For example, we're very, very strict on the use of medications in horses. They are allowed to be used in training when a horse requires it, but that has to be under veterinary prescription. We do not allow horses to race on any medications at all. There's a zero tolerance to doping in racing, and that's really, really important, not only so that the racing is fair, but so that the horses are not treated in a way or given drugs that might make them faster or better or different from what they should be. That's fundamental to racing.
What happens if someone is found to have been doing doping to their horse?
Well, we have a strict policy and we have a very clear testing policy, and we follow the process that you might expect in other sports as well. So if a horse is found to have a positive test, there'll be an investigation, and ultimately if it's found to be a true positive, then the trainer will be held to account for that.
What are some common things that a horse might face during racing that would make you concerned for their well-being? I know that sometimes with races we see them maybe get a bit too hot and things like that. What are you looking for?
Absolutely. We keep a close eye on heat-related illness, as you have described, and that's readily treated just with lots and lots of water, but it does need to be identified. So we do keep a close eye on horses. Horses can suffer injuries, as a human athlete might as well. So every horse, particularly as it comes off of the racetrack, is observed to make sure that they're not showing any signs of lameness, that they haven't injured themselves, created a wound that might need treating, for example. All of those things can happen when they're racing.
Oh, of course, and they're really giving it all they've got, aren't they? If they have an injury, say they have a break, what does rehabilitation for a horse look like?
That does depend on the type of injury that they have suffered. These days, most lower limb fractures, so by lower limb I mean from the hoof to the lower end of a horse's, we would refer to it as the knee, but it's actually the wrist because of the way the horse's anatomy is. Most of these fractures now can be repaired through surgery. There was a time not that long ago when that wouldn't have been the case, but veterinary techniques and understanding has improved vastly. And so now if a horse pulls up lame on the racetrack, that limb is supported in a bandage, or we even have some specially designed boots. They look like ski boots, and they fit to support the leg so that the horse can be loaded onto an ambulance and taken to a centre of excellence where that fracture can be repaired. Once that fracture has been repaired, there'll be a period of rest and again more support applied to that leg, and then they can gradually be brought back into training as the bone has healed and the strength starts to return.
So Sally, in your role as a vet, you mentioned that there's constantly new styles of doing things. We know that technology is constantly evolving and developing. How do you ensure that your knowledge is up to date?
Well, as a vet, I am responsible for making sure that I carry out continual professional development. That's part of the registration with the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. Clearly, it makes sense that that should be specific to the role I'm doing. And we have excellent training where we have the experts who are at the cutting edge of developing techniques and research, and they present to veterinary surgeons across the country at different conferences, and so we make sure we go along to those. But as the part of the British Horseracing Authority, we're also able to contribute to that research. We collect data from the racecourses. If there has been an injury, we make a note of that and the circumstances surrounding it, and that data gets analysed, and we can then use that to improve the way we look after horses, make it a safer sport, which is a really exciting part of the job.
Is it a role that you've always wanted to do?
I was a typical pony mad child, and I went to vet school with the sole intention of working with horses. I enjoyed riding out and being a racing groom as a teenager, and I continued riding out through university and even when I started work. So I've had a particular interest in racing. And having spent 14 years in equine practice, first opinion practice, looking after all sorts of horses, pony club ponies and racehorses as well, a job came up at the British Horseracing Authority as a veterinary officer, and I thought that it was a really interesting role to be part of. And as I say before, I particularly like this idea that we can make changes that affect not just the whole of the racing population, but racehorses and the decisions we make in racing are used to help form policy for all other horse sports, and that's really exciting.
So tell us more about your journey into your role now? I know you touched on it there, but if we break it down, what was the first step?
The first step to going to vet school in the first instance. So when I decided that being a vet was going to be the first thing that I did in order to work with horses. Well, I suppose I should take it back, really. I wanted to work with horses. I considered an array of career options, but I also really enjoyed science at school and medicine and problem solving. And I felt that being a vet would encompass those things and I could use them to work with horses. When I decided I wanted to be a vet at the time, I needed to do 3 A-levels, which were mainly sciences, and to get good grades as well. And then I went to vet school and came out the other side and got a job in practice with horses.
Fantastic. Ben, on a daily basis, how many horses do you take care of?
So at the moment it varies between sort of 3 to 4 horses. Maybe some yards there could be the opportunity to do 5. But those horses are the horses that you take care of and groom. It doesn't always necessarily mean you ride those specific horses, just depending on sort of where the trainer is happy with you as a rider. He'll put you on a horse that he feels best suits you, and quite often it can happen that that horse is the horse that we would say you look after. So your look after is that horse in particular, but that would be more the horse you take care of on a day-to-day basis with the grooming and the mucking out of the stable and taking the horse racing. So anywhere sort of between nowadays would be 3 to 4.
And when you're caring for those horses, do you treat them all the same, regardless of gender or need?
Oh yeah, I mean you take the best care of them and you can, and it's great because in a lot of racing yards there are senior stable staff who have been doing it for quite a lot longer, and you can always go up to them and ask them for advice. Maybe it's coming into winter or and the horse's coat's changing quite a bit, but you're still wanting to keep a bit of a gleam. There's always sort of like great grooming techniques that can really help the horse and implement like a really healthy horse. And you take care of them. It's a passion, it really is, and it's a great passion because, like you say, you always have that affinity and you're always able to keep that connection with them. And they get spoiled because now apples and polos, there's an endless amount of supply in them in every racing yard. So the horses can really deserve a really nice treat as well at the end of the day.
If there's a younger horse, do you have to discipline it from being a naughty pony? I don't know how it works.
I mean, discipline, it can kind of come off as a strong word, but I would say definitely in more of a correction, which, take away any sort of idea of, in the sense of hitting, but you engage in a body language which kind of reinforces and corrects the horse, vocally as well. You want to talk to your horses vocally and, like almost kind of like if you have a pet that you're training, which in these circumstances that they're not, you take very good care of them, but you're not treating them as if they are like your own pet, but you do have to sort of take in a bit more of a tone, and a body language can reinforce the horse, and that makes the horse understand you and your boundaries as well, because you're having to work with them, and because they are a very large animal, they have to respect you, but obviously in the correct manner and in a manner that's very professional and sort of very understanding. I mean, my first rule in any concept of working with the horse is that you just have to be on the same page. It's not always going to be like that, but that's how you build a relationship, and then eventually, it will happen.
If one of the horses has had an injury or a change in its life, maybe it's changed owner or maybe it's got a certain dietary requirement, how do you keep track of that?
I mean, normally, like, information like that will be passed on. We have what we call head grooms, which would be the person who oversees the general, day-to-day of a group of horses, and then we report back to that head groom if any changes have happened with the horse. If we feel like a horse hasn't eaten up, or we've noticed a horse might have a bit more of a heat in one leg than the other. So that's kind of information that gets passed on and is notified, and then the trainer will know as well. It's all just sort of down to good communication within the yard, and.
Are there any moments, Sally and Ben, where your roles cross over and you meet each other?
Most definitely on the race course.
Yeah, there are quite on the daily basis. Well, if a dynamic scoping, I suppose, would be one, but that's that would be a case where if I was to get on a horse, we would put what we call a dynamic scope on a horse, which kind of, I can't really explain a dynamic scope very well, but
if a horse there's a suspicion that a horse might not have a fully functioning airway, so it can't breathe as effectively as it might, then you can use an endoscope, which is a little camera on the end of a fibre optic, a sort of wire, and you can pop it up the horse's nose, attach it to the horse's bridle, and Ben might ride the horse, and that allows you to see what's happening when the horse is galloping with its airway to make sure everything's functioning fine. Because although you can do that while the horse is not exercising, obviously the breathing is at a much easier rate, and so you don't always see the problems.
I suppose it's like if you're having a test to see if your heart's working correctly, you might have them pads stuck on you as a human and do some running to check.
And we do that for horses' hearts as well. So
there you go.
That would
We're
be
just the same.
An ECG.
Yeah.
But Ben, I might see Ben at the race course. So if he takes a horse racing and there is an issue with it, then Ben might present it so that it can be looked at and assessed by a vet. But equally, part of my job is to make sure that the horses are fit and suitable to race. We call it suitable to race. And so we have a set of criteria for which horses are looked at before racing. Some meetings we look at all horses. Other meetings we just use statistics to determine which horses are more likely to have a problem. And if Ben was racing with a horse, he would present the horse to me to assess it and make sure that it was A-OK before it raced.
I suppose in your role, Ben, as a stable groom, you probably, because of that bond you mentioned earlier with the horses, you notice if there's a problem, if they're acting a bit funny, and then you can report that to Sally. Is that how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first person you would notify is like your head groom, and then eventually either an assistant trainer or the trainer themselves, which could then call a vet out. So your first call as a racing groom would be to go to whoever's in charge of you, and then they can notify the vet. But let's say if I'm in the yard and I'm not too sure, and I see Sally and I say, oh, Sally, do you mind? There's always sort of that great connection. There's no sort of disregard just because it's coming from somebody like myself who doesn't necessarily have quite a senior role. So yeah, no, it's very, very well run and organised in that sense.
And within your role, is there room for progression, and are you supported with that?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in today, I mean, trainers and sort of senior members of staff are always trying to encourage sort of a younger generation coming through to seek out opportunities. Nowadays we have great sort of training in the sense of that, we can come into a yard, start off as a racing groom and ride out. Eventually, if we want to progress and learning about checking legs and bandaging horses, then, we can go and ask our trainer or, a senior member of staff, if we could sort of start taking on more responsibility. And then there's definitely room for growth. And it's a great way to come through the ladder. Because if you can, like I say, starting from the bottom, if you can really get that foundation underneath you, you'll go a lot further than you can imagine. And I've been very fortunate in these circumstances I have. So,
tell me a challenge, Sally, that you've faced in your career so far.
Gosh, well, I suppose the first basic challenges are passing exams. Once you've overcome those, the biggest challenge I face in my role at the British Horseracing Authority is getting teams of people on board with new ideas. It's affecting change, and I find that that's the biggest challenge, but it also has the biggest reward and the biggest effect as well, because if you can get everybody working towards the same outcome, then the difference you can make is massive.
And Ben, tell me in detail about the facilities that some places have for horses, because I know we mentioned off camera about horse spas, and I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, I mean, take away the idea of cucumbers on ice, and saunas, but no, I mean, nowadays most yards would be equipped with what we call equine pools, where horses that, you know, might be coming back into light of work, that will eventually sort of progress through their work and their training, they can then go for a swim, which horses can swim to a degree. But yeah, no, they'll be encouraged to go in pools for lighter exercise and training, you know, for rehabilitation purposes as well. And then there are spas as well where horses can walk into, and it'll probably come up to just about their chest. And as the spa would work its way into sort of helping that muscle circulation and that blood flow. There's also equine treadmills, which again would be sort of a fitness and sort of lighter work type of exercise. So yeah, the horses aren't actually just training in the mornings. There's a nice sort of rest period where they get like, you know, good sort of 2 to 3 hours to themselves, and there's even like access to turnout where horses can go out and in fields and sort of, you know, nice and close fields where they can get good amount of grass and the sun on their back. So yeah, I think this kind of idea of them just being out for an hour and then staying in the stable is just, it's not actually true. There's a really nice variety in their day and in their program, and it's quite nice for them actually.
Do they seem happier when they've had that relaxation time?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to some degree, yeah. I mean, you know, you can always tell if a horse is feeling good and if they're walking out with a bit more, you know, bit more pep in their step, as you might say, you know. Yeah, no, it obviously it has its benefits, and like I say, we're really lucky now that a lot of yards are equipped with those type of facilities.
Sally, are those yards and facilities that Ben mentioned there something that's part of the regulatory procedures?
Not per se, no, but we are going back to the rules. We are quite clear what's allowed close to race day and on race day, and we have to be sure that horses are in the best condition to race and that nothing is done to mask anything that might mean the horse isn't fit and suitable to race. So the use of spas is really helpful to make sure horses are strong and flexible and ready to go, fit and ready to go, but they wouldn't be allowed on race courses. So the horses might have their spa in the morning before they go racing, but not on the race course.
And talk to me, Sally, about a typical day on a race day for you.
Well, it would start the day before, when we know which horses are racing, because we can then use the statistical search criteria that I've already mentioned to work out which horses we will want to look at before they race. And we do keep records of horses that have been injured on race courses, so when they come back racing, we'll look at those as well, make sure everything's healed and the horse is fine. And so I'll create a list of the horses I want to see the next day. When I turn up at the racecourse, and it could be any racecourse around the country, although there are a few of us, so we don't travel too far, then we start to look at the horses as they arrive. We also keep an eye on every horse to make sure they haven't injured themselves in transit. Sometimes they have to travel quite a way. All sorts of things can happen. So we keep an eye on that, make sure their shoes are still on, and that all of them look fit and well and healthy, because we don't want any horses on a race course that aren't ready to go. And obviously we keep an eye out for infectious disease as well, because the racing population is really very healthy, but every now and again you might see a cold or influenza, for example, and so we have to be really careful that doesn't happen. And then once we've finished in racecourse stables in the morning and racing starts, we keep an eye on the races and again intervene if there's any issue, if there's a concern. But there are other vets on racecourses. So the BHA have the Regulatory Veterinary Officer, as I've described, that's my role. And then the racecourse will also have other vets present, a minimum of 2 extra, often 3 or many more extra. And those vets are responsible for also following the horses when they're racing, so that if anything happens, there's a vet on hand immediately. And those people can also fix any problems, give first aid, basically. If a horse has injured itself and there's a cut that needs a stitch or a bandage, they're on hand to do that.
So racing days are busy days then for you, Sally, and you mentioned BHA there, which is of course the British Horse Racing Authority, for those who may not know.
That's right, Hope.
Ben, what does a day look like for you with a race day?
On a race day, we obviously, depending on the horse you're taking, we'll arrive at the yard as usual, and depending on what time the horse leaves, you'll get the horse ready to go in the horse box, which is how we get horses to the races. And generally what we would do is we'll go to that horse with our grooming kit, and we'll sort of brush the horse over, making it look nice and presentable for when it travels. And a lot of the time horses will actually travel with what we call travel boots, which actually protects all four of the horse's legs. Some trainers have them just in front, some trainers put all four on, and it really just kind of helps with the horse when you're loading a horse up and you are travelling them, because of the motion of the horse box. Obviously sometimes you just got to be careful and really kind of take that extra precaution in their legs so they just don't get any knocks or bangs. And also, in terms of having their racing shoes on, we'll probably tape their shoes as well, just so they don't stand on so they don't stand on them and pull them off. We sort of make sure always the horse travels comfortably, and in the horse box there'll be a nice bit of bedding for the horse just to stand on, and so it's just not slippy at all for them.
Are these travel boots the same as the ski boots you mentioned earlier, Sally?
No, absolutely not. The travel boots tend to be soft and protective, whereas the ski boots are specifically designed to support injured limbs.
And on the note of travel, with your roles, you can kind of do them from anywhere, can't you? Let's hear about you, Ben. Where have you been?
So actually I started my first 2 years of racing in France. I actually went to the French racing school after having gone to the British one. I had French connections in France, and so I was actually an apprentice jockey for the first 2 years. I was in racing from the age of 16 to 18, and I was in France for the first 2 years. Came back here to Newmarket for about a year, and then did a 9-month stint in Australia, in Sydney, and then from there I travelled from Australia to the US, and was fortunate enough to work in the US for a year, sort of between Kentucky and Florida, and then back to the UK again.
That's amazing. So many incredible adventures I'm sure you had. What are the main differences that you noticed about horse care between those different countries?
I mean, sort of every country implements a different training style. So, for example, in France, it's very similar to the UK, only because sort of in England we're sort of really the home and the hub of horse racing, and throughout history we've sort of spread that across a lot of Europe. So France is very similar to England in itself, but I would definitely say in places like America and Australia, it's what we call track work. So horses are actually training on the track they race on. In Australia the layout's a little bit different, because there's sort of training tracks within the racecourse itself, and most of those racecourses will all be oval tracks, while here in the UK we have sort of a variation of different racecourses that could be like a straight mile, that have a slight bend or undulations, while places like Australia and America, because they're what we call more like speed orientated type of racing to some degree, there'll be flatter oval tracks, and then the horses will train on those tracks and on a day-to-day basis.
Wow, that's incredible. What about you, Sally? Where have you been?
Well, as Ben has pointed out, racing happens around the world. It's an international sport, and our roles are replicated in each of those different jurisdictions. Part of our work as vets is to make sure that we learn from the other jurisdictions as well, and we've already touched on how do we keep up to speed. Well, some of the conferences we attend are international conferences, and there are big ones held around the world, which it's always important to have representatives at. I've been fortunate enough to go to the States several times as the British Horseracing Authority representative on the Breeders' Cup panel, which is really exciting opportunity to see how it's done in another jurisdiction, another country. And so much is the same, but there are still things that can be learnt and things that they do differently, which is really interesting to observe.
And Ben, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, so all I just wanted to add was within my time within the US, primarily a role would just be more of a track rider, so it'd be more just going in on a day-to-day basis and actually just riding the horses. while they'll actually have ground people to do more of what you call the general daily care. While here in the UK, we have that integrated role where, you're both rider and groom.
Did you prefer in the US being one of those, or did you prefer how it is in the UK?
I'm being quite biased here, but obviously I do prefer the UK role to some degree because, again, I love to have that connection with the horse. And in America you can definitely still have that sort of contact with the horse, but you're probably not maybe seeing the same type of gains because you're not actually taking your own horse racing. Those horses already have grooms that are given to them. So, you don't probably maybe get as much as a personal satisfaction out of it. But it was still such a great experience because to have been there on the bigger days and see your horses run, it's still like a really big, really big occasion. So, either way, you're still getting that sort of that benefit. But I'd say slightly more in the UK.
Getting that benefit and that experience. But as you mentioned there, the thing that you're probably missing in that role is being the primary caregiver, which I can tell that you really like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm somewhat to a degree a little bit of a perfectionist, so I'm really sort of like to take my time and and just observe as well. I mean, when you're grooming a horse, you're really just trying to take the best care you can, and even with it stable, just all really the fine detail.
Is being a perfectionist one of the main characteristics that you think someone should have, or what kind of skills do you think someone should have in your role?
I would say it's not being a perfectionist. That is probably quite a heavy term, but you just have to show passion. Passion is what you really just have to give. And, as you go along, you do face your challenges. But I would say, like today now in racing, we're really fortunate that we do have the right training and the right aids to kind of get us to where we want to be. And especially if you're looking to go up the ladder, showing passion and a real great interest, is something that is really well recognised today. And I kind of wish I did more when I was younger, was ask more questions. It can be quite intimidating sometimes, especially when you're going into a new job. But we're fortunate enough that a lot of young people, if they do start to show a lot of interest and ask questions, it really gets recognised.
Going back to the training side of things, does each horse have a different training plan, Ben?
Majority of the time they will do, because each horse sort of runs over different distances, and it could even the possibility over different surfaces as well, because we have turf racing during the summer and then all weather during the winter. The trainer will obviously have a plan in mind in which type of races he's aiming for and what the training program coming into those races are.
Fantastic. And Sally, if we're looking at the end of a horse's career, what happens when they finish racing?
There are lots of options when they finish racing. Some horses will be used for breeding purposes if they've been particularly good, so they might continue to breed the line of next racehorses. That doesn't happen to most. Most horses find alternative careers. Sometimes they become sports horses in a different capacity. If they have the capability that they can do that. Many become riding horses, they become pets. They find homes where they can have a slightly slower pace of life and continue to be looked after and loved. The industry takes aftercare really seriously, and there are lots of aftercare providers and charities, so that the odd horse, and the numbers are really small, but the odd horse the owners might fall on hard times, and there might be some help required, and these charities provide a safety net so that no horse should leave racing and not be looked after and find a second career.
Well, that's brilliant that there's provisions in place to support that situation. Tell me the best part of your role, Sally.
The part of my job that excites me the most is the idea that we can learn from what we do and we can improve safety and welfare of this entire herd of racehorses around the world, and also have an effect on how the quality of life of other horses. That's what excites me. What I love is going racing and being with the horses and the people like Ben who are so passionate about the horses, and that's a real privilege. That's my job.
And the same question to you, Ben. What's the best part of your role?
I think it's seeing through, like, you're able to, obviously being with the horses is just number one, but obviously with that you're always able to see that general like progression with the horse, and seeing the horse sort of really take its form and its racing career to a level that you think, wow, this is actually an incredible experience. Like, without this horse or these horses, I wouldn't have gone to the places I would have been to and shared the experiences. And there's actually like an array of like emotions that go with it. I mean, if one of your horses you look after wins a big race, it really is like a jubilation. It's just so much happiness, and it's a great sort of team like spirit to have, because you've all worked together and get into this to this particular race, or at this moment in time. So yeah, I mean, it's just to share it with everybody else is something I really, really love.
How do you typically celebrate?
I mean, it depends. I mean, sometimes, like with big races, the trainers can actually even throw like a small party in the yard, or we might say, oh, we'll meet up in such and such a place, or a lot of the times I've worked for trainers where you might not see a big party like straight after a race, but you might say towards the end of the month, well, great job, guys, we've had a great winner this month, let's all I don't know, order in pizza and have a drink or something like that. But it's really nice, like, because a lot of trainers now, they will sort of throw like what you'd call a lot of appreciation towards staff now, and you're sort of really able to feel that thank you from them.
I'm pleased that we've touched on that team element as well, because some people looking from the outside could think that your role, Ben, would be quite isolated. You go in the morning, you're looking after the horses. I'm assuming you're doing that by yourself, but actually it feels as though there is a bit of a family there at the yard.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, even a lot of your social time outside of racing would be with the people you work with, but it is very much like a team role, because you're all working together, you're all in the same role, and you've all got the same goals as well for each and every horse. Obviously, every horse races on a different level, just like athletes, so some go, a lot further than others in terms of like, what type of races they're aiming for. But it's very much like a shared role, and because it becomes a passion as well, you're all sharing the same passion. So every time you're at work, you're always really able to relate to each other and even bounce off ideas, and it's really nice talk. It's really nice sort of, nice type of communication.
Well, I've saved my toughest question to last, but can you both please give me one word that summarises working in this industry? Sally.
Passion.
Ben? You can't say same.
No, I could just say rewarding, and to kind of emphasise on that, I think it's because there are challenges in front of you. You're always able to sometimes think outside the box, and you're able to think, do you know what, I could do that maybe a bit differently, and that could really benefit the horse. So when you're faced with a challenge and then it pulls through, then it's just rewarding. So yeah, rewarding.
Sally and Ben, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your stories today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening or watching the Race to Your Career podcast, brought to you by the British Horse Racing Authority. Make sure you head down to the description where there's plenty more information and helpful links. And don't forget to listen or watch the rest of season 1.